again, today he is going to be presenting on ERP infrastructure, increase security, and mitigate risk. Ben, take it away.
Thanks, Kim. So as said, I'm Ben Markin. I'm a network engineer over here at InterDyn BMI. I handle most of the internal and external security for us and our clients. So again, you may have worked with me in the past, and you may work with me in the future too, especially if you choose to subscribe to our web shield. Let's see. Oops. So a little background about myself. Spent a lot of time in the military, almost 8 years. Did a lot of stuff with security there, both in the physical and logical spaces. So I'm pretty familiar with what I'm doing. I've also spent a lot of time in large enterprises as well as small spaces, small home offices. So I'm pretty familiar with how security works in those environments and what works best. And you know, one size doesn't fit all, definitely, in security. So my primary focus is, of course, finding the best security implementation that works for us and our clients, and making it so that it's integrated well into your space and that it's flexible and easy to use. So our objectives here are to educate, motivate, and take action. So we want to educate you guys about how important security is in your business and what it means to you. We also want to motivate you to make sure that your space is secure and that you're taking security seriously, because in small to medium businesses, it's usually on the back burner, unfortunately, but that's just the way things go. So we want to motivate you guys to take action and make sure that you're implementing security, thinking about it in a proactive way, and not a knee-jerk kind of reactive way that usually gets a lot of people in trouble. So, and it's a scramble time when that happens. So just a little introduction. Again, we're talking about security and how it's important to small to medium businesses, and we're also going to talk a little bit about how to mitigate some of that. We'll give you some statistics, mostly from the 2015-2016 years, and we'll go over that and try to show you how important security is. Now, I've been told that this video, there's supposed to be a video here that's not going to play over the webinar. But what it is it's the opening theme to the old popular TV show, Mr. Ed. And it kind of leads into the next slide here. But the key thing to take from this is that everybody knows this song. If you've ever watched the show, even once, this opening theme sticks in your head. It's catchy, it's easy to remember, it's simple. And that leads into today's game. So we're going to play a little game. And at the beginning of this, we're going to show you 2 passwords. And the goal for this is to remember the passwords, and then we'll tell you why at the end. So this is the first password. And remember that these passwords, especially nowadays, are case sensitive. So you have to remember that it's a capital B, a lowercase c, etc., etc. And you got some numbers in there to help mix things up. The second password is a horse is a horse. And it's a little easier to remember. The only thing that's capitalized are the 2 A's. And, it's from the catchy theme song from Mr. Ed. And again, we're going to tell you at the end of this why this is important. I'll give you a couple seconds to take a look at it, absorb it. And the goal is to try to remember them both. And we'll move on. All right, so next we're going to take a little bit of time to look at some of the numbers and why some of these things are important to us. So the first number we're going to look at in the top left is the amount of money that's been paid in 2015 to ransomware. So a lot of people may have also heard this as crypto locker, ransomware, crypto wall, and some other varieties of malware that gets into your system. And what it does is it encrypts all of your files. And usually you'll get a warning that comes up and says, pay X number of dollars to unlock this server and get all of your data back, and we'll do it for you, but you have to send the money. So this is the amount of money that's been paid in 2015. And this is important because this is the amount of money that the quote-unquote bad guys are getting to basically bolster their enterprise as a criminal entity and that's a lot of money. I mean, if I have $1.3 billion to spend on bad stuff, I probably wouldn't be working at InterDyn. So 1,000 down on the bottom right there is the average cost for a server to get decrypted if it falls victim to ransomware. This number does fluctuate depending on if it's a large server sometimes or the strain of crypto locker that you get. But $1,000 is average, and we'll talk about more why that's important later on. So 91% of companies that did experience ransomware, or 91% of the companies experienced ransomware in 2015, 2016. So that's a huge number. That means that sometime you will probably experience ransomware in some way, shape, or form. It may not be as crippling as it is to some people, but it does happen. 93% of those companies that did experience ransomware had up-to-date antivirus configured and deployed properly. So what this means is that just because you have antivirus deployed in your environment isn't enough anymore. Back in the day, it used to be that you could have some sort of antivirus like Norton or McAfee, and you would be pretty protected, but that's not the case anymore. There's so many ways around antivirus that you have to have multiple layers of security to be able to protect yourself and your environment from those threats. So down in the bottom left there is the billions of dollars that ransomware is estimated to have cost the U.S. business in this year alone. This year actually refers to 2015, 2016. So in 2015, I believe the number was 75 billion, and then in 2016, that number jumped exponentially. And the reason is because ransomware is becoming very, very prevalent in the wild and out and everywhere. I mean, it's running rampant everywhere you go, and it's very difficult to stop. So 100% of the companies that did have an infection or experience an infection did have some sort of business continuity appliance or plan in place to where they were able to continue operations. Now, this doesn't mean that they didn't suffer. Just because you're able to continue with business and everything else doesn't mean that you don't lose data. So for example, if you're infected with ransomware and you are taking backups of all of your data, but you only back up every 2 weeks, that's 2 weeks of work that's just lost. So that's a good amount of time and effort and energy of you, your company, and everybody else in it that is just gone. And it's impossible to recover unless you are taking proper backups once a day or even more frequent than that. So taking a look at more of the numbers, the threat of falling victim to the malware is undeniable. So in fact, 9 out of 10 managed service providers report recent attacks among small business clients. Now this is also important because you're seeing a lot of small to medium businesses become prey to malware, and it's not just the big companies that people are going after anymore. If you look at it, these large enterprises and big conglomerates have a lot more money to spend on security than the small average person that owns a small or medium business. For example, a cafe or something like that. You don't have the disposable income, quote unquote, to spend on security and making a very secure environment. And that's one of the big reasons why it takes a back burner in these small to medium businesses. One is finances. Two is just it's not a concern because a lot of us don't deal with financial information or anything like that. We're not banks. We run manufacturing and industries and things like that. So that is why when you do fall victim to things like that, you also need to report it and make sure that the authorities are aware of it. One of the big reasons, especially with ransomware and malware, is that if you report it to the authorities, they're able to take a lot more effort into looking at the forensics of it, especially for ransomware. And if you actually look, there is a website, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it's run by the FBI, and they actually have a list of keys to well-known ransomware that's out there already. So you could actually save your data because the key is already made publicly available. However, that's not the case all the time because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different strains of ransomware out there. So make sure you report it. So going back to this, who's concerned and who's not? 88% of IT pros are always concerned with ransomware and malware or other malware threats. This is because they're in the thick of it all the time, every day in and day out. This is their job, it's what they do. So of course they have a lot more exposure to it, and they're a lot more familiar with what it is to them and what it can do. Now, 34% of small business owners are very concerned with malware or ransomware. And this is because, again, a lot of them they're not thinking about security in the sense that a lot of the IT pros are. So if you're a professional in the IT field, you're thinking about protecting data and what it means to the enterprise or the business. If you're a business owner, you have a lot more on your plate, and you're not necessarily thinking about IT security because that's a small portion of your giant plate that you're thinking about. And that's, of course, why you hire an IT team so they can worry about it and take care of it. But as a small business owner, you have to also think that if you do fall victim to ransomware, it doesn't, in fact, affect your entire company. If your main servers become infected with ransomware, it basically brings your operation to a grinding halt, and then all of a sudden the only thing on your plate is ransomware and trying to fix it. So it's something to keep in mind. So here are some of the attack vectors in which ransomware and malware come into the environment. The top is definitely through spam and phishing emails. So when you get those emails that say click here to view whatever, you want to be very careful and really think about what you're clicking on and what some of the attachments are that you're opening. People are getting very clever with this these days, especially with the number of things like PDFs and stuff like that are out there that are just floating around. So they're getting really good at disguising what a malicious email is and what isn't. For example, if you get an email that has click here to view your eFax and it's from somebody that might look like it's pretty legitimate, for example, somebody from another company that you do business with, it's a very mindless thing just to click on it and say, oh, I got a fax from this somebody, I should open it because it's probably important. And then what it does is it actually takes you to a malicious site that embeds some sort of malware on your computer, and you don't even know it because it happens so fast. Number 2 on this list is lack of employee training, which in my opinion is one of the most important things, because if you train people properly and raise the security awareness within your organization, it bolsters your defenses dramatically. And we'll talk a little bit later about the quote-unquote human firewall and why that's so important. The next 3, malicious websites, ads, and other, and lack of security. Lack of security is definitely on the downhill slide because it is becoming more prevalent that people need security nowadays, especially since you hear about the news of all the large breaches. Target a few years ago, JP Morgan, and some of these other huge conglomerates that lose just tons of data. And then other is usually because of poor configurations on already existing appliances or lack of patches on software and hardware. So here's a quick graph on how your infections will spread if you do get infected. So these days, especially with ransomware, they're encrypting them into a type of virus called a worm. Now, a worm is a type of virus that propagates itself throughout a network very, very quickly. And if you're familiar and watch the news, you'll remember that a few years ago there was a worm that attacked the stock exchange in New York and spread across the stock exchange and basically shut it down for the day. So these things spread fast and they're dangerous, and that's exactly why you need to make sure you're taking a proactive stance against some of this stuff to protect your environment and protect your systems. And in some cases, your infection will get isolated to a single system. Now that's not always because of security that's in place. Sometimes it's because the person that is dumping this stuff onto your system just doesn't know how to traverse a network properly. But still, that single system could be your main domain controller, for example, which could essentially bring your entire system to a grinding halt because nobody can log into the system to do any work. So just because it's isolated to a single system doesn't mean it's not a concern, and it could still spread if it's not taken care of. So you need to make sure that you have proper security in place to make sure that it doesn't spread, though. And as soon as something does come up, like some sort of indicator, or if you're aware of it, you need to make sure you try to isolate that system from the rest of the network as well so it doesn't have a chance to even spread. So 63% report that ransomware led to business-threatening downtime. So business-threatening downtime, in a lot of places that do e-commerce and things like that, this is very critical. So we all know that time is money, especially when you have a website that's facing to the public, and if nobody can make orders, that's money lost. So ransomware isn't an easy thing to recover from, especially if you're not taking proper backups. But even if you are taking proper backups, the average downtime to recover from those, recover your systems from those backups takes a long time, hours. It's never minutes. So you're looking at an average downtime of at least 4 hours with good backups, with people that have practiced implementing those backups and restoring the system from those backups. So a lot of times you'll have proper backups, but people won't know how to implement them because you don't practice it a lot. And it's not something that you typically practice or have the means to practice because you're hoping that your systems never go down and that you have to recover from a backup. So proper training in this aspect is very important, especially when, again, time is money and you don't want business crippling downtime. 48% report that ransomware led to the loss of data and or hardware. So losing data is very common in a ransomware attack, even if you're taking proper backups again, because you're still going to lose the data between the time the backup was taken to the present. Now, if you're only losing an hour, you're lucky. If you back up on a daily basis, the chances are that you're probably going to lose at least half a day's worth of data before you realize that you've been infected with ransomware and that your system is unusable. Now, sometimes this does affect hardware as well because there are things on, for example, flash drives and chips and things like that with burned-in information that get encrypted, which makes the hardware completely unusable. So you have to replace that hardware. So you're looking at more downtime, especially if that's a hard drive that has particular data on it, because you have to go get a new hard drive and then replace it, because most likely you don't have one on site to replace it with. So who are the targets? So as you can see here, number 1 is professional services, number 2 healthcare, and number 3 construction and manufacturing. So these numbers are actually changing significantly, especially this year. I attended a lot of webinars for some of the big security firms out there like McAfee, Norton, and WatchGuard and things like that. And I listened to a lot of their 2017 security predictions, and most of them are predicting that these professional services, so the banks and the large corporations and things like that, are not going to be the main targets this year, but small to medium business is. And the reason for that, again, is because these large businesses and conglomerates have the means and the know-how and everything else to implement security properly. So as a malicious actor, of course you're going to go after the lower hanging fruit, something that's easier. You might not get as big of a score per se, but if you gather up enough of these, you could make just as much or more off of all of these smaller businesses than you would taking down that single entity, say, Target, for example. So as a small to medium business owner or entity, you need to make sure that you're really taking that into consideration because you guys are the targets. So we have antivirus, so we're protected, right? Not really. As I had said before, antivirus software is a very small portion of what makes up a good defense these days. So making sure that you have a good layered defense is key to making sure that your organization is safe. there are very few companies out there now that specialize in a product that covers all facets of security. There are a couple out there that do okay, but it's very difficult to do so just because there are so many facets of security. You have to think about not only antivirus, but you have to think about anti-malware. You have to think about email spam. You have to think about patches for applications, and you have to make sure you're, again, blocking ads and pop-ups, and then cybersecurity training. And like I said before, training and security awareness is one of my biggest concerns for most companies, because nobody spends time with it, especially in small to medium businesses, because again, it's not on the forefront of your mind when you're thinking about a small to medium business. A lot of people think, I don't have the type of data that people are after, so why would they come after me? Well, with the advent of ransomware and crypto locker, you are a target because you suddenly have a resource that the bad guys want, which is money. So you want to pay, they want you to pay to get your data back, and a lot of people end up paying, unfortunately. And we'll talk a little bit more why that's not good. So how do we protect ourselves? So the biggest number one thing that we can do to protect ourselves is take proper backups and make sure that we have a good disaster recovery plan in place. Now this doesn't mean just have a plan and say, yep, we've got a plan. You need to make sure that you actually go through that plan at least once a year, and everybody, all the key personnel, know what they have to do to maintain operations in the business. And this is very important because if you actually do come to the point where you experience a disaster, you need to make sure that everybody knows what they're doing, or else it means more downtime. And as we talked about earlier, time is money, and if you don't have the people that are trained in making sure that they know what they're doing for the business, then you're going to have more downtime. That kind of leads into number two, which is employee training. Now, employee training doesn't mean just doing the disaster recovery backup. It's training employees into recognizing other facets of security as well. Maybe not as in-depth as your IT personnel, but to a point where they can understand, like, I probably shouldn't click on that and I should forward it to my security guy so that they can look at it and say yes or no, that's probably okay, or no, it's not okay. And then as you see down in the rest of the list, antivirus software and email spam filters and things like that are very, very small compared to these top two. And the reason again is because we need a good layered defense to protect against all these different types of attacks that are coming our way these days. So here are some of the potential results from security breaches, and these some of these are focused a lot on the larger entities or people or companies that have that fall under different regulatory bodies such as HIPAA or Sarbanes-Oxley and things like that. But this is still something that you can take heed of even as a small business. So things like loss of sensitive or proprietary information is very important. So if you're a small business that makes widget A and you're the only company that makes widget A, if you lose that information on what widget A is, how it works, and everything else, and it gets sold to another company, suddenly company B is making it for a little bit cheaper. Disruption to regular operations is a big one. Again, if you're an e-commerce business, which most of us are these days, we all know that downtime, especially for your customer-facing website, means that you're losing profit. Litigation costs. Now, if you're in the healthcare industry or if you're in the financial industry, you can experience a lot of litigation costs, especially if you're under any of those regulatory bodies, because you're going to get hit with a lot of fines because you weren't properly protecting your data. And of course, there's civil and or criminal prosecution as well if you choose to go after the criminals, or even from your customers if they think that you weren't doing a good job of protecting their information. The FBI can help, right? Not always. So this is a quote from Mr. I can't pronounce his last name, but this special agent made this quote in 2015 at a small conference in Boston, I believe it was. Now, the FBI has come out since then and said, no, this is this isn't what we do. We don't advise people to do anything. We give you the facts, and then it's up to the business to decide. But for anyone in any sort of organization to say, to be honest, we often advise people to just pay the ransom. Now we're talking specifically about ransomware. And the reason is because when people pay the ransomware, they get their data back, and it's usually a fairly quick process. But what it doesn't help is that it doesn't plug up the holes in your security. So there's nothing stopping anybody else from taking advantage of you the next day. So if you pay the ransom once and then you pay it again, so if it cost you $400 the first time, maybe it costs you $500 the next time or more. Or maybe you just pay the $400 again. Now that's $800 into the bad guy's pocket so that they can go invest it into better gear so that they can infect you and your neighboring company that maybe has a little bit better security, but now that the bad guys have more money and time to invest into breaking that security, suddenly you and your neighbor are both infected and have issues. So the FBI and other places can't always help, and you should still report the information, but you shouldn't, again, taking the proactive approach to security and making sure that you're protected is the best way to make sure, or the best way to prevent this. So here's what Uncle Sam has to say about all of it too. So first and foremost, keeping your operating system and software up to date with the latest patches is very, very important and key to maintaining a good security environment. Things like this are often overlooked because if you're not familiar with how computers work or anything else like that, you might not even know that there are patches out there. The other thing is that sometimes introducing a new patch into some software might break some other piece of software that's in your environment, which can cause a lot of headache and problems. So sometimes people don't like doing patches because of that reason. Employing a data backup and recovery plan for all critical information is very, very important as well, especially when you're dealing with crypto locker or ransomware. Again, if you're taking good backups, you don't even have to pay the ransom. You just roll back to your last backup and you're good to go again. So don't follow unsolicited web links and emails. So make sure when you're clicking on stuff, just be mindful that you know where it's going and you know where the email came from. So using an application whitelist to prevent malicious software and unapproved programs from running. So this is deploying things in your environment like App Locker or things like that, so that if somebody does happen to get some ransomware on your system, they're not able to run it. And what this does is it basically creates a lockdown for applications that are allowed to run. This is actually one of the best defenses against things like ransomware because it prevents that application from running and encrypting your entire system. And then of course, even though it's not, it shouldn't be your only line of defense, you should still keep your antivirus stuff up to date. And then you always want to restrict users' ability to install and run unwanted software applications. This goes into the idea of making sure that you give everybody in your organization just enough privilege to do their job. Because if everybody has admin rights to all the systems, that just opens up your entire environment up to attack, basically. So if one account gets compromised, they can take run of the entire system. And then you want to avoid enabling macros from email attachments. Now this isn't just email attachments anymore. If you ever notice in programs like Microsoft Excel, there are things you can do in there that run what's called Visual Basic in the background, and it will run a macro or basically a script that can really damage your system. If you're practicing good security, you disable those macros and force people to click a button to run them, and making sure that you know where that Excel document came from and it's not something malicious. So some more about security in network. We're going to talk about password and account policies. First, what you want to do is eliminate all default usernames and passwords. So if you're familiar with security at all, there are are things that happen that most people don't even know of. One big thing that happens a lot is port scanning across the internet. So what port scanning usually does is it'll go through and it looks for open ports, and if it finds an open port, particularly on port 22, which is SSH, which is something that a lot of remote administrators use to log into systems, it will go through and start trying a bunch of generic usernames and passwords, usually defaults that come on devices. For example, if you find an open SSH port on a Cisco device, a router, let's say, the first thing that you'll see usually is the username and password of Cisco, because that's the default username and password for all Cisco devices. So when you get a new device and deploy it in your environment, you want to make sure you get rid of all those default usernames and passwords and make up your own. So again, the default passwords are usually very easy to remember, like the example I gave you, Cisco. You want to make sure you replace that password with something that's relatively long and very complex. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's important toward the end. So a lot of the service accounts that you use for your environment, you want to make sure you reset those with complex passwords as well. You want to convert all possible accounts to a managed service account. And you want to limit the processes to one service account per process, because if you start getting multiple processes per account, if that one account becomes compromised, it can take down more facets of your network. You want to disable logon rights for non-user accounts, so if that person's not a user of the network, you want to make sure you disable that account. For example, test users. That's a big thing that you find in a lot of security audits. People will make test accounts and they never ever disable them. And then you always want to make sure you routinely audit user accounts and use a change manager if possible. So going through, again, the example of test user, you want to make sure that you're going through and auditing all of your user accounts and making sure that they're valid. This is also important with the offboarding process if somebody leaves your company, because if you don't disable those accounts, they're still active on your network and they can still be used. So if the person that is leaving is somehow not very happy with you, then they have access to your system if you don't disable that account. And then you want to make sure that no one user is an admin for everything. So this is the idea of separation of duties and making sure that you just have enough to do your job. So if you're a system administrator, you want to make sure that even that system administrator has either hoops to jump through to get through to every system, or that they're not an administrator for everything, and that maybe you have two admins, one for one system, one for another system, and that they don't have a lot of overlap if possible. So more about securing your network updates. 85% of malware infections occur due to unpatched software. So if you read the news, you'll know that Java, for example, is one of the biggest attack vectors for most systems. One, because it's used everywhere, and then two, it's very vulnerable. Java and things like Adobe Reader, for example, are very, very difficult to keep patched because they're constantly being patched. Every week there's a new patch for one or both of those pieces of software. So making sure that you have a good update schedule and that you're doing it regularly is very important for protecting your environment. So I keep talking about this idea of layered security. It's not just having an antivirus installed in your environment. It's making sure that your users are well trained and are aware of what to look for when being mindful about security. It's also about making sure that you have other security devices in place, like email filters and spam filters and things like that. Yeah, so making sure that you have workstation security, gateway security, and server security. So the workstation security would be your antivirus. Gateway security would be having a device of some kind, like for example, a watchguard in place to where all of your internet traffic is going through, so you can make sure that you're inspecting all of your internet traffic. And then server security, making sure that you have antivirus and some other things like app blocker deployed on your servers so that malicious applications can't run on them. You can also do something like a hosted anti-spam, which is running all of your email through an external company like Barracuda, for example, that specializes in filtering out email spam. Device security, again, making sure that firewall switches and copiers are protected. Copiers are a big one because they're very easily exploited, and a lot of people don't think of them as avenues of approach into an environment, but they're there. If they're connected to the network, you need to make sure that you're taking proper precautions and changing copier usernames or passwords or anything else like that. So securing your network again, if you have resources in your environment that people have to get to externally, you need to make sure that they're only available on a secure connection so that people aren't eavesdropping and taking advantage of just grabbing information off of wherever and being able to get into your environment. A key thing is, again, to making sure that you're protecting your network is doing a periodic network security audit. So making sure that you're regularly changing passwords, regularly deleting users that are no longer needed, and also making sure that everything is up to date, patched, and that you're implementing those. Bring your own device is a very big thing for a lot of companies these days, especially with the way things are becoming more mobile. We have laptops, we have tablets, we have PDAs, we have all sorts of these different things that need to hop on the network. So you need to make sure that you have a good plan for managing all of those devices that are hopping on your network. Of course, you don't want everybody to be able to just hop on your Wi-Fi in your company and then suddenly have access to everything. Wouldn't be good. So managing your traffic in and out of your company is very important as well. A lot of people only think of the in portion. We don't want people to get in. But you need to make sure you're looking at the stuff that's going out as well. This has a lot to do with people from the inside that maybe aren't very happy with things and suddenly start transmitting large amounts of data somewhere where you suddenly lose all of your company secrets or financial information, for example. So firewalls, perimeter networks, and DMZs. I'm pretty sure most people know what a firewall is and what it does. Perimeter networks, this is the idea of creating a network, and this is also what a DMZ does, but basically it's a network in between your internal and external network where you harden a lot of devices and make sure they're very secure, and the idea is that it's another layer that people have to get through to get to your internal network. Disabling macros and auto run through group policy. If you've ever plugged in a USB device, you sometimes get the little window that comes up and says, do you want to autoplay this? Or do you want to automatically open the files that are on here? You never want to do that. And this is something that a lot of people have a hard time with, and it's don't cater to your users. As much as I really like keeping the business going, sometimes you can't comply with every wants that your users have. So for example, if your users want to get to YouTube on a regular basis to watch their cat videos, you might have to shut that down because YouTube might be infected with whatever, or they might be using YouTube to look at some other things that you don't want them to. So one of the things you can do about to secure a Windows server, reducing your attack surface. So making sure that this server that you have is not exposed to the internet is one of the key things. So you only want to use reputable applications, so making sure that you're not installing something like an alternative to Adobe Acrobat Reader that isn't from Adobe is probably not a great idea. Use a user account whenever you can. So this is the idea of making sure that not everybody has a domain admin account in your domain, because domain administrator basically has run of everything in your domain. You want to make sure that you have a lot of good local security policies in place, and this is somewhere where a lot of places fail at security is something as simple as a password policy. So making sure that you have a password policy in place that forces users to change their password on a regular basis and enforces complexity is very critical to maintaining a secure environment that a lot of people don't do. You don't ever want to just turn off the firewall even for a little bit. So for example, if somebody wants to get to YouTube but it's blocked for a reason. You don't want to just ever turn off the firewall so that somebody can get to YouTube. There are other alternatives if that one person wants to get to YouTube. Make an account for them that is allowed through the firewall or something different. So creating the server admins group and restricting login. So when you do have system administrators, you want to make sure that they're in their own special group and that they have basically hardened security around their logins. So for example, making sure that they have very complex passwords to be able to log in is a critical thing. I had talked to you earlier about App Locker and what it does, so deploying that to servers really helps. Auditing login failures, so if you see a lot of people that are trying to log into your systems but they're coming from different places, or if it's a known account that is having trouble logging in, maybe contact that user and say, hey, are you trying to log in at 3 o'clock in the morning? If they say no, then their account might be compromised. So securing a SQL Server, making sure you encrypt your backups, this is very important because you want to make sure that your data isn't open and in the clear. Testing backups frequently, so whenever you get a chance, make sure you take a look at those backups because sometimes they have a tendency after sitting a while to become corrupt. You want to make sure you're using the 3-2-1 rule. Now this is important because the 3-2-1 rule is that you have 3 copies or 3 backups of your data. You have 2 of them on site locally that you can get to, and then 1 of them on site. Now you do this because the 2 local copies, you don't want to keep them on the same system obviously, but you want to make sure you have them locally that you can get to them very quickly if necessary in 2 different places so that if one system fails that has a copy on it, you still have another one. Now if your entire internal system becomes infected with ransomware, for example, you can fall back on that one external copy that you have off-site somewhere and you can still restore from that backup. You want to limit access to backups and log folders. Use Windows authentication when possible. And the SA account or the SQL administrator account password should be very complex. And this is actually another account where it's a built-in for SQL. And you probably actually want to change that SA account to a different user. So auditing logins for SQL Server, this is a lot of more of the same. Making sure you're auditing all of your things. Turning off the browser service, so this is making sure that nobody has access through a web browser into your backend SQL server so that they can just pull data out of the tables and everything. You want to disable any of the unused features, so if you're not using it, don't even have it. It's just another avenue that you have to worry about that you don't need to. Decreasing privileges for service accounts. So if you have a service account that's only doing one process, just allow it enough privilege to do that one process. Don't make it an admin. Avoid granting sysadmin too often. Again, you don't want to have a bunch of people with administrator accounts. And then you want to force HTTPS for the SQL Server Reporting Services, or SSRS. This will help protect your information, making sure it's not sent in the clear and that people can just grab it out of the internet. So securing Dynamics GP, only admins should have the SA password, which is the SQL administrator password again. And again, this is the account that you'll want to change anyway. So, but only an admin should have it. Nobody else should have a need for that administrator password. The idea of least privilege security method, so this is giving people access to the things that they only need access to. Roles are predefined, but it's recommended to define your own and use user tracking to test and refine. So when you're doing GP, a lot of the roles and users are already predefined, and they may not be, they may fit, they may not fit, but even if they do fit, you still want to basically make a new group with the same sort of roles and everything else. And the reason for that, again, is because everything that's built into an application is known to the bad guy or a malicious actor. So making security through obscurity is the idea of changing all of that. So use a complex system password to control access. Again, if you have an administrator or some sort of system that has run-of-the-mill, protecting it as best you can with a super complex password is the way to go. Upgrade to jet reports for better security. Don't put all users into power users group. If you're not familiar with what a power user is, it's very similar to an administrator. Not quite as free running as an administrator, but they still have a lot of power. Use a centrally managed share for dictionaries and reports. Use AD to restrict access and permissions. If users can use web client, they should use it. Use SSO when possible to control access using the Active Directory, and don't make users local admin just to provide access to necessary directories. Excuse me. If you're not familiar with the difference between a local admin and a domain admin, a local admin is access to the local computer itself, so you're actually bypassing all of your domain security that you might have in place, and local admin accounts can be very dangerous in that regard. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the human firewall. The human firewall is the last line of defense, and in my opinion it's actually one of the first line of defenses also. So to make sure that you have a good quote-unquote human firewall in place, and the human firewall, when I say that, is you, the person, the end user. So you want to make sure that you're testing and training your end users and continuously training them. Oops. For example, we had shown you earlier that one of the biggest attack vectors is through email attachments and spam, but if nobody in the company is really very security minded and they're not trained on what to look for, then people are going to be clicking on all those all the time. So here are some things that you can do today to be mindful of security. So number 10 is create a password policy and enforce immediate password change. Now, if you just create a password policy and don't force people to change their password right away, that password policy won't actually take effect until they actually change their password. So if you have someone that's set to where their password never expires, then they're never going to be under the password policy. You want to remove local logon rights for any non-user account. So again, this is if you have a local logon for a computer that bypasses all of your domain security, and that might not be what you want. You want to change default passwords on network devices. If possible, you also want to change the default users on those. Number 7, audit privileged security groups and remove non-essential accounts. So this is making sure that any of the accounts that are in some of these power user groups or admin groups are disabled if possible, especially if they're not needed. You want to block DNS requests out of your network except from your DNS servers. So if you're not familiar with the way DNS works, you can ask me later, but the idea is that all of your DNS requests are only going to and from one source within your company, and it's a lot easier to manage. Number 5, create dedicated admin accounts for the administrator to use. Run a free antivirus scan online. There's lots of free tools out there that you can do if you don't want to pay for it. They're not as good, of course, as the paid ones, but it's still something, and something is better than nothing in this regard. If you're taking proper backups, you want to test them and verify that they do work. Configure a mail system to block dangerous attachments. So for example, you don't want people to be able to click on something that ends in .exe, which is an executable file, because that could really damage your system. And number one, call InterDyn BMI to schedule a network security audit, and I'll be happy to do that for you. So now we're going to come back to the game, and I hope you remember the passwords, and I'll tell you why this is important. So here was the first password, and if you couldn't remember it, but you remembered this password, it's very good. And here's why. So the first password, even though it's a little more complex, would only take a computer about 2 hours to crack. Now this is something that's called brute force attack, using basically just a computer to run through every single combination of letters and numbers given a certain length. Now the second one would take about 2 billion years to crack. And the reason is simply because of the length of the password. If you think about a PIN, for example, if you have a 2-digit PIN, it's very easy to crack it. For example, if the PIN were 12, you have 11 or 21, or you get it. As soon as you start adding more characters and increasing the length of that, it exponentially increases the number of combinations that PIN could be. So creating an easily remembered passphrase instead of using a series of random complex numbers and things that nobody will ever remember is actually a little bit more secure than trying to go the complex route. While complexity is important, length is actually what is more important when creating a password or passphrase. So at this time I'd like to open the floor to questions, or if you have any other questions you can email me at ben.markin@interdynbmi.com.
Good job, Ben. Excellent timing. All right. Well, I did have somebody ask for a copy of the deck. They found that information was really good. So make sure you email that to me so I can get that out. Again, anybody wants a copy of that, there's a lot of good resources here. It's kim.peterson@interdynbmi.com. And let me just reiterate, some of my customers that have done the security audits and system audits with our team really have been very, very happy in understanding, because there's times where you think this should be good enough, but understanding why it's not is really, really important, especially, Ben, with your background. It's very helpful to understand that coming from you to explain what they ought to be doing and making steps in that direction is really, really important. Any other questions in the queue? You can type those in on the right-hand side. As of right now, I don't see any questions. So, Ben, you've been doing this for a long time. I bet you have a lot of stories that you could tell. What other tips would you have as far as folks? Are there other websites, groups, things like that that people should be watching, blogs, anything like that that has helped you?
Yeah, so actually, this next slide here, there's some related resources.
Excellent.
So visiting any of these sites, you can learn a little bit about security. Even just watching the news is, especially these days, IT security is becoming very important, because you hear about a lot of these large companies and breaches happening, and of course the bigger and the worse they are, the more you're going to hear about it on the news. But making sure you're just kind of following along with what's going on, what's important out there. But there's some other blogs, for example, that's not on here, like Krebs on Security. Brian Krebs is a journalist that does a lot in the security space. So he's always got some good articles out there too.
Excellent. So in other words, everybody RSS feed these so that you get these in. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Ben. Great job. And again, everybody, please get in touch with us if there's anything else that you would like assistance with or questions that you may have. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you, Ben. Great job.